2 months after the breakup, they were mostly fine. They predicted they'd be wrecked for the better part of a year. Same people, same relationship, and the forecast wasn't even in the neighborhood of what actually happened to them. Psychologists at Northwestern caught it in real time. The blind spot has a name: immune neglect. Here's the setup. They recruited college students who were in relationships, real ones, in love, making plans, sharing a toothbrush. Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel wanted the thing heartbreak research almost never has: data from before the heartbreak. Because by the time someone's crying on your couch, the story has already been rewritten by the person telling it. So they got ahead of it. Every 2 weeks, each participant filled out the same short survey. How happy are you this week? How's the relationship going? Boring questions asked over and over for months. Buried inside was the strange one. Imagine this relationship ended. How would you feel 2 weeks after? A month after? 2 months? Rate the damage right now while that person is still texting you goodnight. Everyone answered with total confidence. Of course they did. You know your own heart better than a stranger with a clipboard. The predictions were bleak: weeks of flatness, no appetite, the certainty that this one specific person can't be replaced. Then the researchers did the only thing that makes a study like this work. They waited. Because across enough months and enough young couples, some predictable share of those relationships are going to end. Dozens went in. About 2 dozen got broken up with or did the breaking while the surveys kept arriving. And that's the gold. The same human being measured before and after with no memory in between doing the editing. Their own forecast, in their own handwriting, sitting right next to what their life actually looked like. Now, if you've survived a breakup, you already know week 1. That part, they got exactly right. It hurts precisely as advertised. You reach for your phone to text someone who isn't yours anymore. The gap doesn't show up in week 1. It shows up in the weeks nobody bothers to warn you about. Because the distress drops fast, much faster than a single one of them said it would. Within a couple of weeks, the average misery is already sliding back toward where it sat before. By the later check-ins, most are near their old baseline, the same baseline as when they were happily together. Not healed in some cinematic way, just normal, irritated about parking, genuinely looking forward to Friday night. And they're not performing toughness for anyone. It's the same anonymous survey they'd been filling out for months. So the pain was real, the recovery was real, and the forecast was fiction, which raises an uncomfortable question. How do you get your own future feelings this wrong on the one subject you're supposedly the world expert on? This is where a Harvard psychologist named Dan Gilbert walks in with an answer almost nobody enjoys hearing. Gilbert spent years on effective forecasting, how badly people predict their own emotions. We're wrong in one specific direction. We're decent at guessing whether something will feel good or bad. We're terrible at guessing how long. His team studied people denied tenure, people who lost elections, people whose long relationships had just ended. Over and over, the same shape: awful, then noticeably less awful, then surprisingly ordinary, sooner than anyone predicted. His explanation: you're running a psychological immune system, and it works about as quietly as the other one. It's the part of you that starts finding reasons. She was never going to move across the country anyway. It's the friend you suddenly text more, the gym you actually go to because the apartment is too quiet. It's the memory reweighting itself until his good moods stop being the headline and his silences move up the page. None of that feels like machinery. It feels like you finally noticing true things you'd somehow missed before. That's the whole trick. The system that saves you disguises its work as ordinary clear-sightedness. And because it's invisible, you can't factor it into a prediction. Gilbert calls that failure immune neglect. You forecast the blow. You never forecast the repair because you have never once watched the repair happen. If that just moved something in how you see yourself, that's the whole point of this channel. Stick around. Think about how ordinary this blind spot is once you know where to look for it. You can't feel your pupils widening when a cloud crosses the sun. You just notice the world stayed visible. There was a song you couldn't get through last year. It's just a song now. You can't name the week it stopped hurting. Nobody sent a notification when the repair was finished. So the next time you forecast a loss, you use the only footage you have, the crash. You remember lying on the floor. You don't remember the Tuesday you forgot to be sad. And here's where this stops being about breakups, because that same blind spot is quietly running your calendar. Immune neglect doesn't only make you dread endings, it makes you refuse to cause them. Picture the relationship you've already outgrown. You knew months ago. You're still in it. Not because it's good, because you price the aftermath using a forecast you now know is broken. You imagine the empty apartment and you feel the whole thing at full volume, forever with no recovery attached. Of course you stay. You're comparing a mediocre real life against an imagined pain that never expires. That comparison isn't close, and it isn't honest, and it'll hold you in place for years. Same broken math on the smaller stuff. The email you won't send, the number you won't call. You're not actually afraid of rejection. You're afraid of a version of rejection that has no end date. Real rejection lasts about as long as a bad meeting. Annoyed at dinner, fine by the weekend. But the forecast says otherwise, so you don't ask, and nothing happens, and nothing keeps happening. Here's a quick test. Think of the last time somebody left you on read for an entire day. It flattened you around hour 6. Now try to remember how you felt about it a week later. You can't, because it didn't survive the week. Your recovery is so efficient, it erases its own evidence. Now, everything so far makes resilience sound universal. The study says it isn't, not for everyone, because one group's grim predictions came true. Almost exactly. And it wasn't the group you guess. It wasn't the ones who got dumped. It wasn't the ones in the longest relationships either. It was the people who, months later, were still in love with the person who had left. For them, the pain didn't fade on schedule. Their bleak forecast turned out to be an accurate one. And it makes a grim kind of sense once you see what that repair system actually needs to work. It recovers you by rewriting the story, which means it needs the ending to actually be an ending. It needs to conclude he wasn't right for you, and it can't conclude that while you're still hoping. Every unanswered message keeps the file open. Every maybe blocks the sentence that would close it. That's the real cost of no closure. It isn't the mystery, it's the paused repair. The person who knows exactly why it ended gets to start rebuilding by the weekend. The person left holding a maybe stays in the crash, unrepaired, quietly being right about their prediction. Which flips something. Closure isn't a luxury you're allowed to want. It's the switch that turns recovery on. And you don't need it from them. That's the part people spend years waiting to learn. A story you tell yourself and commit to works. An unfinished story you keep reopening doesn't. Hope, in that one narrow situation, is the thing holding the wound open on your behalf. So take both lessons together, because separately each one is half wrong and half dangerous. 1. You'll recover from nearly everything faster than you can currently imagine, and you'll barely notice it happening. 2. That recovery needs the door shut. Leave it cracked, and the engine idles instead of running. So what do you actually do about a blind spot that, by definition, you can't see? You can't feel your psychological immune system working, but you can stop leaving it out of the math. Next time you're deciding something scary, write down how bad you think it'll hurt and how long. Then find the last comparable thing that happened to you and ask honestly how long that one lasted. Not how bad, how long. That's the number your brain flatly refuses to supply on its own. You'll usually find the honest answer is weeks where you predicted years. Use the real number instead. Because every risk you've ever declined got priced with a fake one, and you never audited it. The job you didn't apply for. The move you talked yourself out of over 3 separate dinners. The conversation you've rehearsed in the shower for a year and somehow still haven't had. All of it rejected by the same calculator, running the same missing variable every single time. And that's why knowing about immune neglect changes something instead of just being an interesting fact. It doesn't make you braver, it corrects the price. Courage was never the part you were missing. The risk was always survivable. You just couldn't see the part of you that does the surviving. So the ask gets easier, not because it might not hurt, but because you finally believe in the after. Those students walked into that lab certain a breakup would define the whole next year of their lives. It defined about a month, and they were the very last people to find out. Here's the line worth keeping. You're not fragile, you're just badly informed about yourself. Your pain is loud and your recovery is silent, and you've been making every decision off the loud one. If this reframes something for you, like and subscribe. Next time, why the deadline you're dreading will feel like nothing by Thursday. So assume the repair, make the ask. The version of you on the other side already knows how this goes.